welcome back. Finding that team to help you is key, and sometimes finding the right job is also something you want to do. And as much as we talk about real estate and finance, most of those goals can't really be accomplished without a job. Sam Henry joins us, who is the principal and lead recruiter with Seattle Corporate Search. And, well, first, welcome, Sam. How are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm very good, thank you. So you really focus on sales, management, client services, and you're ranked one of the top 10 recruiters in Seattle.
Thank you.
So you're welcome. You probably knew that. But you certainly have been in the industry for a long time. I didn't even know recruiting was around 23 years ago.
Well, my first placement was a blacksmith, so yeah, I've been around.
Yeah. Pounding the shoes on a horse to get
exactly.
Before the 520 was built, before the tolls.
Yeah.
So talk a little bit about maybe the role of a recruiter and what you do.
Sure. Well, I think to be a good recruiter, you end up being an advocate for both the candidate that is looking for a job and, believe it or not, you even become an advocate for the company that's looking to hire good people. The advocacy sort of starts with the candidate and helping them get noticed, helping them stand out from the crowd and giving them professional representation, if you will. And from the corporate side, it's helping many companies get noticed in a very competitive environment. For example, if you're a small high-tech startup or you're a software company and you're trying to compete with Amazon or Microsoft to attract a high-caliber candidate, it's oftentimes difficult for them to get noticed. No matter how many ads they run, it's oftentimes hard to find good people.
And there are industries that are much more competitive than others. Mm-hmm. You talk about Amazon and Microsoft. I mean, that would make a lot of sense. It's as an employee, it's like, well, do I want to go work for Amazon or company XYZ with startup money?
Exactly. Yeah. And it's difficult sometimes. So, I think part of our role as a recruiter is to spend some time with that company and not only find out what makes them different, what's their value proposition, but then when we're talking to candidates, we can then say, hey, you probably haven't heard of these guys. They're still kind of in stealth mode, but they just received $25 million of venture capital money, and let's have a conversation about this.
Go ahead.
And typically, what we're trying to do is either identify an active candidate, which is somebody who is actively looking for a job, might have their resume posted, but also passive candidates, which is somebody that might be looking if presented with the right opportunity, but they're not necessarily making it obvious that they're looking. So they could be looking confidentially.
It's called hiding it from their boss.
Exactly.
Sam, so talk about, okay, if somebody wants to get a job and if they have one or not, you prepare these candidates.
Right.
That's got to be different than a lot of recruiters. I feel like a lot of recruiters are more like this brokerage, maybe without that education or preparation phase.
That's exactly right. Yeah. A lot of recruiters are based out of state. They're working remotely. They're virtual. They never even meet the candidate they're representing. And what they end up doing is identifying hard skills or actual experiences that are on a resume and then just sending that resume to an employer. There's no sense of whether or not that person's going to be a good culture fit. And so one of the things that we do is we try to get to know the culture fit for both parties. So we meet every candidate in person that we choose to represent. It starts with a lot of resume viewing, but then it evolves into phone screens and then eventually meeting with them in person to really help identify what their skill set is. So we're in a better position then to call these companies and say, hey, let me tell you why this person is different. Let me tell you why they stand out. And that's a huge benefit to any candidate, just helping them get noticed.
I would imagine you start building some equity with these companies too, and the recruit and the hiring managers.
Yeah, absolutely. You develop trust and you develop relationships with them over time, and the more you get to know them and get to know their needs, then they begin to sort of trust you as an extension of their company.
And that in turn, then you really do try to provide the best person, not just throw people in there and hope it sticks.
That's exactly right. And again, 90% of the reason why somebody gets hired are soft skills or personality traits, characteristics that don't show up.
Being funny, fun.
Exactly. Having a nice new office that's clutter-free, things like that. Yeah.
If I had an office, I don't think that's where I'd be interviewed. Kathy, you're coming over to help me with my office. Sam, talk a little bit about, why understanding or preparing these candidates for the interview is such an important part of the process. Because I think culture fit is big. It goes beyond money.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great question. Well, preparation is a big part of it. A good candidate is going to be eliminated pretty quickly if they haven't done their homework. Usually one of the initial questions that always gets asked is, so what do you know about our company? And why us? Why do you want to work here? And if you can't intelligently answer that and you come across as if you're just going through the motions, companies are going to notice. On the other hand, if you're prepared, and not just prepared in terms of talking about the company, but you're prepared with what questions to anticipate and what questions you should be asking, which is a huge reason why people get hired, because it shows their intent and their motives in wanting to benefit the company, oftentimes just through the questions that they ask. So, for example, let's say one candidate walks in and says, tell me about how much this job pays and what are the benefits and where's my parking spot. And the next candidate walks in and says, tell me what problems you have. Tell me how I can benefit your company. How can I be of service? You can obviously see how just by the intent of that question, that candidate's going to stand out from somebody else. So we try to offer that type of training and consulting when we meet with a candidate.
You know, that's a really interesting parallel that we have discussed before on the value of a professional. Because, you know, when we talk about mortgage, real estate, finance, you know, a lot of the industries that we have on here, we always talk about asking that first question before you start presenting an answer.
Right.
And so many people go directly into sales mode. Hey, here's what I can do. Here's what I can do. Here's how much it costs. And not enough people take the time to really honor that person by listening. And if you're able to ask that question as a candidate, I bet you make the hiring person feel way more important.
Absolutely.
And you're right. And so you end up going down a different path than, you know, where they're almost selling you rather than you're selling yourself.
Absolutely. And, you know, people's three favorite topics are themselves, their problems, and the advice they can give.
Their kids.
Their kids.
Yeah.
And so if you can get an employer to talk about those three things, they're typically going to like you a lot more.
What are
as a
those
result
three
of it.
things again? They're
well, usually if you can get somebody talking about themselves, their problems, or to ask their advice, oftentimes those people are going to like you more as a result of it. And what's ironic about that is those employers will end up doing 90% of the talking during the interview. And then when the interview's over, they'll think back and go, wow, I really like that guy. What a great conversation.
So then if somebody is prepared, knows some good questions to ask, how do you reach out to the right people? I mean, how do you reach out to the right manager? Is it the HR? Do you go straight for the owner? Do you call Jeff Bezos, go, hey, Jeff, what problems do you have?
Yeah, well, you know, there's no silver bullet, and I think you need to do it all. You need to go through traditional channels. You know, you certainly don't want to alienate human resources or disregard the process as a whole. But I think there's a very strategic way that you can get better results, and that is to, again, think of the core of the company and think, well, who is the manager that's running the department that I would report to? And identify that person through LinkedIn or through your own network or through conversations with your peers, and reach out to that person directly. They're the ones that are feeling the need, you know, probably in the most pronounced fashion. So if you were able to call that person directly and say, you know, hey, I wanted to reach out and introduce myself. I understand you may be looking for an X, Y, and Z. I happen to have that background, and I wanted to have a quick conversation with you and find out more about your needs. You'd be surprised at how receptive those managers will be. Oftentimes they don't get those kind of phone calls because there's so many filters between the candidate and themselves. And so oftentimes they'll welcome those kind of questions.
You know, I know somebody, and we have to go to break here in just a second. We're here with Sam Henry, Principal and Lead Recruiter with Seattle Corporate Search. Sam, I've talked to people who actually have been up against 300 or 400 people at, say, a job at Microsoft, and they got the job because they called.
Right.
And nobody else did.
Right.
Out of 300 or 400 people, it was the hiring manager actually told her, you got the job because you called and you followed up, and you just makes me feel like you want to be here more than anybody else.
Right. Yeah. And I think people are so worried about political correctness these days that sometimes they forget that the simplest solution is often the best. And, you know, years before we had the internet, people would pick up the phone and do just that. They would call and introduce themselves and say, hi, my name is, and this is my background, and can we have a conversation? And ironically, that's still the most effective way to get a job.
Versus just clicking LinkedIn, I want to connect to you. And
exactly.
Thinking you're going to get it from there.
Right.
Well, Sam, thanks so much for joining us again. That's Sam Henry, Principal and Lead Recruiter from Seattle Corporate Search. When we come back, real estate might be on your mind. We're going to discuss new construction now and then and what you may be thinking about. My name is Ben Brashen. You're listening to Brashenomics.